This month, we're talking about transitions and readiness with a focus on building a business that runs without the owner. To have this conversation, I've invited Justin Albertson on. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. This is a topic that's been more near and dear to my heart lately over the years as I've talked with families and worked with business owners who, unfortunately, are not able to, maximize their transition, maximize their exit, whether they sell or whether they transition it to another family member. I know we're going to get into some of the areas of focus that if they plan ahead that they can exit or transition on a high, if you will.
Yeah, so I think it'd be a good place to start about what do we mean when we say exit planning?
Yeah, it's really a preparation for the inevitable, and whether or not you're planning to actually sell your business outside of the, of the family, you're going to maybe sell it to your employees. I just talked to somebody the other day, was talking about a client who just said, well, I think I'm just going to shut the doors. So exit, looks all different. And for you to exit as a business owner in a way that is actually kind of fulfilling for you, you want to start thinking, early. So I think a lot of times people think of exit planning as I'm going to sell my business, but that's not necessarily what exit planning is about. It's really about helping to prepare you personally for that inevitability of an exit, help your business be able to run without you as a business owner. So you have the option of being able to sell it or to pass it on, because we know if you leave and it can't run without you, that's a bit of a problem for whoever's going to take over after you.
Right.
So then there's the financial component as well. Like you need to think about your personal financial needs once you don't have the income from that business, or that income changes dramatically in the future.
Let me ask you a question. Something I've heard in like networking conversations where I talk to people about exit planning in general, business owners have a tendency to think there is more value in the business than there actually is. In other words, they believe that if they were to sell, they would get X number. And when it really comes down to the valuation of the business, they are a significant percentage below what they had imagined.
Yes.
When we talk about satisfaction there, do we know is that purely a financial numerical response? Like
Most
I'm satisfied with number, right?
Most of it is, and it lines up with what you were just saying about how most business owners have they've got a bigger number in mind. And they've also, I mentioned like that personal and the financial planning component of exit planning. They've based a lot of their future planning on a number.
Right.
And then many of them can't get the number. So they're dissatisfied with the fact that they didn't get the number. And then that has a ripple effect or a snowball effect into the other areas of their life after they've exited. Because now I've had to compromise my dream of traveling the world or setting up a foundation or whatever it is that they wanted to do. They've got less capital to work with at that point.
Yeah. I mean, that's super interesting. I think we also should point out as we go deeper into this conversation, something that you've already said is that not all owners want to sell, but they all are going to retire, at least hopefully, in some shape or form. And the business needs to effectively run without them, which brings us to one of the core issues that pulls value down, but also makes it very difficult for the business to function without the owner. And that's what we would call owner dependency. We are talking about transitions and readiness and building a business that functions without the owner with Justin Albertson. In this month, we're talking about exit planning and the various shapes and its forms. But one of the key problems that businesses face as owners plan for exits is having built a business around themselves. The business requires the owner to be present to function. And we call this owner dependency, where the founder becomes the bottleneck. Justin, what have you seen in these circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, for the business owner, for the founder, they feel trapped in their business, can't take a real vacation because they can't unplug. They're worried about whether or not the business will actually survive while they're gone. I was actually just talking with a business owner last week who went out on quote vacation for about a week, and he told me I worked probably 2 hours minimum each day while I was on quote on vacation, and that's a bit of an issue. You talked about the bottleneck where everything is running through that business owner. The team is always turning to them, and they've kind of built that dependency on them. And, there's various reasons and ways that happens. There's some structural things and there's some personal things that happen with different business owners. But ultimately, the business really cannot function without the owner because they are involved in everything at a pretty detailed level. And people either will be a little bit gun shy about making decisions and moving forward with things because they're not really sure, is this the right way to do it or the best way? Because, my owner always maybe thinks a little bit differently than me. And so now things just get bogged down. And if, they're literally not present for a long enough period of time, the business can really suffer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's another angle on this that we experience in our work at Stranberg is that when we think about owner dependency, I don't necessarily only view it through the lens of the business is dependent upon the owner's presence, but also the owner's dependency upon the business for a sense of purpose and meaning in their own life.
Sure.
So, right. You know what I mean? So one of the ways this manifests is that, that individual that you cite who is on vacation, but still working, they're doing that because of a story they're telling themselves about their own relevancy to the business. And oftentimes with these individuals, you'll find some other meaningful insights about how they spend their time outside of work. They haven't cultivated a sense of purpose or meaning outside of the enterprise that they're running. And what this means is when they try to exit, in our work, it's mostly that they are trying to bring in outside professionals to run the company for them, that they end up coming back to the business. Not necessarily because the business needs them, however, but because they need the business to give them a sense of purpose.
Right. Yeah. And in the exit planning world, that's where the personal planning element is really important. When you talk about things that are important, you need to start talking about those things before they show up. And I think people underestimate that quite a bit. Where am I going to spend 60, 80, 100? Some of these people, 100 hours a week that they work in their business. I mean, it's kind of, it's a lot because that's their thing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And that is a ton of time that you have to replace. And without purpose, like you said, that time can be very hollow. And so that's a really important part of the transition and the exit work is to make sure that there's something that they're going toward. That they don't feel like they're just leaving something behind, that they're actually going toward something else and something new and a new chapter. So spending time with that business owner to help them to really create that vision for the future so that they have a new purpose in life is critical.
And you know what? That purpose is not golf.
No.
As much as we all like golf, but that's what we'll hear. It's like, oh, well, I can finally go golfing the way I want to. And so, you do that for, that might last you 3 months.
Yeah, if they're lucky, I'd say a month.
I mean, that's so no shade on the great game of golf, but it unless you're going to go on a tour and try to turn pro, or maybe get involved with the golf club in some type of more involved manner, it's a hobby, not a lifestyle. It's not a purpose. We've seen people function very well, getting more involved with faith-based organizations and charities.
Yeah.
Even like getting involved in smaller businesses. I think I've seen a lot of interesting cases where fabulously successful entrepreneurs find their retirement functioning like as a score mentor, doing coaching, or even working in places like a barista or as like a bike shop where they have a place to go to work, feel like they're adding value to something, but not being at the center of their business. But there is like a very real thing though that isn't about the owner's purpose. And it is about the actual value of the company. So, I mean, you can imagine a circumstance where the owner is also the rainmaker, if you will. So all revenue's coming from them. And if you're going to buy that company from the owner, and the revenue is going to exit with the owner, right? You've got a problem. So how do you address, I mean, that's kind of a cut and dry example, but how would you address something?
Yeah, I think that's where, the talent question comes in is, do you have some talent in the organization that can fill that particular role? And you need a runway to be able to create the right kind of plan and create the set of circumstances, or maybe create a role that's not there for somebody to pick that up for that, for this owner.
Right.
And I've seen it a lot, and I'm sure you've seen it a ton, where if families are thinking we are replacing somebody, kind of a one-to-one replacement. And what I usually say is, well, let's start with what are all the things this person does? What are all the roles that they play, and where are they contributing in the organization? Because when you start at that point, you might look at it and go, well, that's actually like 3 part-time jobs together or more.
Mhm.
It's not, those things shouldn't all be together when we look at it
Right.
from an organizational perspective. But over time, we've just kind of migrated in that way. And especially if you have a quote, younger business that is, primarily founder led, and maybe they're thinking about transition to the next generation, the
Right.
founders typically involved in a lot because that's how they built it. They had to do everything at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
And over time, some of that they've shed some of that, but not all. And so that's part of that work, is to look at what roles are you playing? Not role. What's the role? It's the roles, plural. And then let's organize things in a way that we can figure out how to shed that from you and let somebody else pick up that set of responsibilities. We do that kind of one by one until eventually the owner's got nothing. Oh, they don't have a box anymore on the org chart, and that's a good spot to be when you're ready to make an exit, especially if you want to sell. That's a highly valuable, highly transferable business.
I think a good spot to plug a book here. I don't know if you've read this before. It's called Clockwork by Mike Michalowicz. Does that ring a bell?
I have not read that one.
Yeah, it's effectively moving towards an operating system that allows an owner to exit. And one of the things that he puts in there is a vacation test. Now, what do you need to do as a business owner to set up a business so you can take a 3-week vacation and not check your emails? Yeah, it's like it's an interesting test, right?
Yeah. Sometimes what works for some business owners who are kind of struggling getting over that hurdle of not being around is, to think about, let's imagine a world where you can travel the world and not have any contact for a year.
Right.
You come back and the business actually performed better that year than it did the year before. If we can shoot for that and we get close to that we're going to be in a good spot.
Yeah.
For you, because that gives you optionality of now I can decide how much or little do I really want to be involved in my business. We talked about the new purpose. Sometimes they don't have the space to even start thinking about that kind of work. So that can create some of that space to now say, all right, well, maybe you don't have to be as involved, and we can start working on what's your next chapter. Because that is a significant project. It's not something you just think about over the weekend and you land on it, because it ends up, being too thin. Yeah,
it certainly takes some time. So this month we're talking about transitions and readiness and building businesses that function without the owner. We've talked about exit planning, and we've talked about owner dependency. And we're going to talk about the execution gap with Justin Albertson. So Justin, we've been talking about how owners need to develop a sense of purpose outside of the business, but also build a team around them that allows the business to function without them. But all of that still requires a roadmap and an operating system for how the business is supposed to function. And we pointed out in our previous conversation about how it tends to function where it grows out of the space where an owner is just doing what they need to do to keep the lights on and moving it forward. And that process has a tendency to evolve up until the point where they need to exit.
Yeah. We typically see this, this execution gap when that starts to happen, where people they're still looking to the owner. They have trouble taking accountability. But then there's another part of it, which is the owner holding other people accountable for the plan, right? We've got a plan, we've got goals, but Sally's been with me since the beginning. She's really, I really like her a lot. Or, George has these great relationships with the customers. At the end of the day, the things that we talked about getting done aren't getting done. And it's because we've kind of built this relationship that lacks some of this sense of accountability and really a focus on execution. Ultimately, the business owner ends up taking a lot of that on themselves to get the things done, or is just chasing everybody constantly, having the same kind of conversations regularly, and things aren't moving forward the way that they need to.
So how do you set up, what does a system of accountability look like when an owner's not there with their watchful eye?
Yeah, it's really a culture shift. It really is. And that takes a lot of time. Typically, the focus on being able to, as the owner, to delegate well, which isn't just, hey, Bill, I need you to go do these 3 things. It's a matter of really empowering you to be able to do those things well and let you take ownership. And if it doesn't go well, then you need to suffer the consequences. I
Right.
kind of think of it like parenting a little bit. If you always solve your kids' problems all the time, well, they're never going to learn how to solve
Right.
their own problems. So it's the same kind of thing. You need to be able to be there to guide and do some coaching, but ultimately you can't swoop in when things aren't working. And it's stop giving answers and help people to come up with their own solutions. And over time, again, that doesn't happen overnight, or it's over time they start to realize I only need Bill for these things. I don't need Bill for everything anymore. And now I feel more empowered, and now I can take accountability, and it makes my job a lot easier holding you accountable because you're already in that empowerment state, if you will. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Do you think when you talk about an execution gap, is this a good time to think about something like EOS or another operating system that can be implemented to help an organization bring accountability and management to an organization, let's say, to their execution?
Yeah. So when I think of EOS, I think of it as a great tool to help create clarity and alignment on what's important and what we need to hold each other accountable to. That's kind of the structural component. Where there's a gap sometimes is in that skill or that behavioral component, which is, okay, so what happens when we've agreed on the priorities and you're not delivering?
Right.
Well, the EOS system, it's not going to solve that. So you have to be really good as the boss, as the manager, and the business owner, the leader, to be able to have a good constructive conversation with somebody when things aren't going that well. Now, I know EOS has some resources for that, but the core of an operating system is really about clear vision, clear mission, clear values, and those are all of the things that help us to stay aligned and get clarity on what we're all doing, so we're not all running around doing different stuff, and we're actually working together. But ultimately, there's going to be a rubber meets the road type of situation that we have to have a good, productive conversation. So there's a skill-based element of this accountability and being able to close the execution gap that I think is really, really important. And frankly, I think some people, they want the tool. Give me the tool. It's like, okay, great. I gave you a hammer. You just hit yourself in the eye. But
Sure.
I got to teach you how to use the tools, right? And the tools are only as good as the person who's using them.
Oh yeah, isn't there there's a habituality to it also that I think kind of gets lost in this, is that we use an analogy with our clients. You don't use a hammer, but what we do use is we think about the person who might come to a health coach and say, "Look, coach, I'm about 30 pounds overweight. Help me lose this weight." And the coach is going to say, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, calories in, calories out. You're going to stop eating cheeseburgers. Yeah, I know that's your favorite food. We're going to cut it out. And you're going to run 3 miles a day. Okay. And I want you to come back in 3 months." And then 3 months later, the individual comes back to the coach and says, "Coach, what the heck? I'm now 40 pounds overweight." Right. And the coach will say, "Well, look, hey, are you still eating cheeseburgers? And have you been doing your running?" Right. And if you don't follow the plan, it's not going to work. But there tends to be this notion of people following back on habits that they've established for really long periods of time. And behavioral change is really hard. And in an organization, that behavioral change is going to be the ways that people interact on a daily basis. Right. And that pulls back into the owner dependency conversation before, is that for decades, I called the boss whenever there was a problem.
Yeah.
Right. And what I need to do is say, that's not what I'm supposed to do anymore. But that there's still going to be like a compulsion to do it. You're going to want to pick up your phone and say, "Hey boss, did you see what Joey just did?" And then you're perpetuating that cycle. That's going and getting that cheeseburger and you're putting those pounds on. You know what I mean? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, and then it's on that boss to respond appropriately, to not continue to feed that. Because I think a lot of people get into those roles, those leadership management roles, because they're good problem solvers, and organizations do that and say, "Hey, we need to give that person more responsibility, so we're giving them a team." But they keep problem solving from there, and they're not really managing, they're not really leading. And so, talking about the habits, that's a big habit. That's actually one of the toughest habits to break as you move up in your career, is to go from me solving all the problems and having all the answers because, I'm the only one doing this job, to now I have a team. And I need to enable them and help them. Yeah. So when they call, how do you respond? Because you've got to help them break that break. So it's there's, a two-way street, or it's more dynamic than just me having to do it. That's why I mentioned it's more of a cultural kind of a shift that needs to be made in an organization around accountability. It's me taking accountability. It's also, how do you respond when somebody else isn't taking responsibility, or they fail, or, make a mistake, or those kinds of things. That's really important. And those things happen on a pretty frequent basis, and over time they build up.
So this month, we're talking about transition and readiness and ensuring that a business functions well without the ownership group. And we're chatting with Justin Albertson today. And you can find more information about Justin in the comments. In the conversation this month, we've talked about exit planning and owner dependency and the execution gap. And in the execution gap, we covered a little bit of what a business operating system is and how it can effectively set up a business to function well, regardless of who is in a position within the business. We've talked a little bit about the EOS and how that can help guide accountability. I'd like to dig in a little bit deeper in what the key components to a good business operating system are.
Yeah, I think that the advantage or the benefit of using something like EOS, whether you use EOS or not, it's fairly popular, so I think people kind of understand that, is that you take what is basically between the owner's ears, and you clarify that for the organization. What is the long-term vision? Where are we trying to go in the next 3 to 10 years or longer? What does that mean in terms of our next year priorities? And then you need to break it down to the quarterly and then weekly execution. And it's a way for the owner to communicate to the rest of the organization what's critical, what's important, and keeping people focused on those things on a routine kind of basis. It's also a way for the owner to get a beat on how are things going, because if you know the EOS system, there's a weekly reporting on the key priorities for the quarter. You say on track, off track on everything that you're working on. And so the owner doesn't have to run around to every single person and have these one-off conversations about, how's it going and what's working. In that process, you flag when there's issues, and then you work on the issues. And so it's a really great mechanism to be able to create the clarity for where the organization is going, what's important now, today, and then the next few days, and then that back and forth, communication to keep people updated on how things are going.
Yeah, I think the communication up to ownership is an interesting point. A piece of language that we like to use for this concept is, we call it severing the owner-operator mindset. And just up to a certain point, ownership decisions and operations decisions are living, but to use your language, between the same ears. And that means that your tolerance for risk is subject to you looking at your bank account and your personal read of the economy, right? Your vision is going to be much more opportunistic, because you might learn about something that is all of a sudden available to you and you can just make that decision. But the moment that you are not in the operating seat, that those synapses are no longer just between in one skull cap. They are in two or more.
Right.
And those need to be strong lines of communications back and forth for that to be effective. And where we've seen this go wrong is that communication fails or defaults back to old patterns. And then you've got an owner who's imagining circumstances that have have some basis in reality, but a lot of it is based in how they are feeling about the state of things, as opposed to data-driven updates about what is actually happening.
Yeah. And another element too, when you think about an organization that has great operating systems, is that they're also very process-driven. So not necessarily, every little button click that you're going to make, but for each of the core functions, the organization has a set of this is how we do things here, right? And then that helps with the communication around what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Why did you do it that way? This is the process. Okay, let's get back to the process. It gives you the ability to ask the question, well, why did you make that decision? I thought our priority was this, or the direction was that. Right. And it allows that. We talked about accountability before. It allows you to open up that conversation, because sometimes those things just, it's like, do I say something? That doesn't seem right. I don't have, now it ends up being just my opinion, whether it's right or wrong. But if we have a process and something documented and we've established this is how we do things, it's easier for people to then ask the question, and they don't have to ask it in an accusatory way. It's just, wait, help me understand. Help me understand. Like we said this, but we're doing that. So
I
what
gotta,
yeah.
I gotta dig into this a little bit, because when we talk about process, and oftentimes with our clients, their idea of process is something like do the right thing. Yeah, and it's like when they say like that, well, we expect people to do the right thing. It's like, well, what do you
Yeah.
mean when you say that? That's so situational and subjective. But they also want, and I think this is like there's this level of ambiguity that really suits an owner,
Yes.
because the right thing is subject to how they are viewing the circumstances at any particular moment.
That's right.
And there's no way for a outside party to read that, except maybe having spent enough time with that person to know how to be able to predict how they're going to respond.
Right.
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 But you put a new person into that system, which is generally where Stranberg is doing its work. They don't have that. They haven't ran those miles with an organization to say like, oh, I know how the owner is going to respond in this particular circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why really codifying values is important.
Uh-huh.
And I did that work for quite a while for companies. And then, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I learned from Gary Ridge. He was a longtime CEO of WD-40, the idea of actually prioritizing the values, because your values can get your values can get compromised if you think about things like doing the right thing or integrity and customer, being number one. For example, this is kind of an easy one. Well, the customer is asking you to do something that's illegal. I'm compromised because my values are, customers number one and integrity. So what do I do?
Right.
Well, so let's order these. Like absolute number one is, do the right thing or integrity or whatever, however you want to phrase that. Number two is the customer. So in that case, now it's clear. I have to say no. Right now, we would hope that I think we would hope that most people are not going to do anything illegal. But if and I've seen this too, where the company pushes so hard on a thing that then they wonder, well, why do people do these things that don't seem right? It's like, well, because we were espousing to you to serve the customer, or like we're trying to make as much profit as we can. So I had kind of a gray area, and I went this way to try to get more profit. We should think about that, because that's how people are going to process day to day.
When I see generic values statements, they're almost never taken seriously.
Yeah.
I think you've done this work more than me, but when I see do the right thing and integrity as the value statements, they say that what they seem like is marketing. Like, and in fact, the organizations that have those types of values tend to not put a lot of value in the concept of values. Yeah. Sorry, that sounds a little bit like word salad there. But when you talk, I see this a lot. Like, I don't understand the purpose of values. I don't care what's written on the wall. I care that people do the right thing. And what I want to see is a litmus test that I found is useful is, give me a time where your core values have been used to make a difficult decision.
Yeah.
Right. Where, and an example that I like a lot, that a lot of people can relate to because it's a big business, is the Cathy family that owns Chick-fil-A doesn't open for business on Sunday.
I know. It's amazing,
right?
Isn't it?
Think about that revenue.
Yeah.
Right. They're a popular business, and a lot of folks are gonna say, hey, I would love to have a chicken sandwich on a Sunday afternoon. Right. But they, for their value system, are saying, you know what? Yes, we could make more money, but we believe in giving people an opportunity to exercise their faith, whatever that might be, and that they need a day of rest. And that's more important to us and our value system than getting another dollar. And that's a difficult decision to make. A lot of business owners are going to say, you know what? No, I want that dollar. And that's what we're going to do. We at Stranberg, we have a people first value. And the idea of people first is we're prioritizing genuine human connection. If you think about the work of connecting people to family companies, that's sincerely important. And so it's making it difficult. It's actually difficult isn't the right way to say it. It's become a very helpful North Star in how we navigate working with artificial intelligence. Right. So one of the things that's coming up is that we're working with a meeting note taker that we need to sunset. I mean, the reason we're sunsetting it is that the company's rolling out a new service where they will mimic my voice. They've recorded enough of me that they can say, hey, Bill, you're spending a lot of time in meetings. What if we just created an AI simulacrum of you, and then we will do the meeting on your behalf and then send you the notes? We'll give you more time. And like, yeah, I can look at this and I can say, hey, that'll make me much more efficient. But that would be a big violation of my values. And I can use that to make a meaningful decision. But if my values are just integrity, how does integrity, integrity is super important, don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying it's not a valuable trait in a person and an organization, but if integrity is my value system, how is that stopping me from, or how's that guiding my decision making?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think that's the part that in my work with organizations in creating values is really important to make sure that they anchor on that, is that I want you to think about this as a way to help people make better decisions. So that's why it fits in this operating system category.
Yeah.
Because it's a way of being, it's a way of operating, it's how we are. So you need that along with here's how we do it in terms of the steps. We also have to have that set of values to guide us. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So across this month, we've been talking about transition and readiness and preparing businesses to function without an owner. We've had this conversation with Justin Albertson. You can read more about him in the notes below. We're to zoom out from everything that we've talking about today, across this month rather, from owner dependency to execution and functioning without an operating system. There's just a general way to look at this and imagine it being from the outside. And we'll just suggest to you the concept of good, genuine business hygiene. And we use the word hygiene. We tend to think about the way we keep ourselves and our body. And if you think about the idea of exit planning, you're thinking in some capacity, in some shape or form, of bringing other people into your business, right? So we are saying, if you're going to sell, that a prospective buyer is going to come sniff around and look at not just your financial statements, but how your business operates. Or if you're going to hire new people to help you run your organization, they're going to come in with a discerning mindset, sniff around and understand whether or not your business is a good place to bring their career. And if you take the idea of hygiene, if you're going out on a date and your shirt is misbuttoned and you haven't brushed your teeth and you haven't shaved your head, if you're Bill Stranberg, people are going to come look at you and they're going to say, I don't know if this is where I want to continue investing my time, right? And so we want to think about the idea of business hygiene as what makes the business attractive to the outside world to come in, not the customers, mind you, but the people that work on and support the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, I think it's important, regardless of whatever your future plans are. If it is a sale, you pointed out that the potential buyers will want to see a business that's been very well kept. I usually think of the analogy of selling your home. You want to sell your home and somebody comes in and there's stuff all over the place and, the bathroom hasn't been cleaned, that's going to turn people off because they're going to wonder, is this been well kept? And what am I going to get if I buy this?
Right. Right.
Where's the mold hiding, in this, in this house kind of thing. And I think the same goes for, the new hires, Bill, as you mentioned. We have some business owners who are thinking about, transitioning to the next generation. And because of the wider experience gap now than ever before, as, people have children a lot later, a lot of the folks who are potentially going to run the business and own the business in the future just don't have as much experience. So a lot of them are thinking about, how do I get kind of a bridge, leadership, a bridge CEO or COO or somebody like that to come in. And I mean, it better than probably most people, the first impressions are really important. Yep. And if they get a bad, they get a bad whiff of something because it hasn't, been taken care of, then you might lose a really, really great candidate.
Yeah. I mean, what you want to see happen, I think, as a general idea, is that Stranberg just works exclusively with family companies. And one of the interesting things about that is that the family company ends up functioning and developing a personality and identity of its own in the same way that a family cabin that everyone goes and vacations at does. And like the way the decor and the smell of it all feels a certain way. But there's also fiction baked into that a family needs to contend with. Because if its personality is not really changeable from a person, but a business, people can change in and out. And in fact, a family company, people need to change in and out. And if the story of the business is Justin is the business, then when Justin is no longer the business is no longer. And that's not the way the story works. It's like the business is indeed like that cabin. It's not, Grandpa may have built it, but his kids took it over, and his kids take care of that cabin in the way that grandpa did. And they honor the story of him riving the wood with his own hands, or whatever the story of the cabin is. But if the story of the cabin is that it's grandpa's cabin, then the cabin burns down when grandpa dies, right? And that's not the way a business functions. A business is an entity, but it's not a human being. Human beings can work in and around it. And breaking owner dependency and setting a business up to succeed means that different people could come into every role within that business, and the business will still stay true to the vision and the values of ownership.
Yep.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's how it seems for me. All right, cool. Justin, thank you for coming today. This has been a great conversation. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right. Me too.